you are and which organisation, if any, you represent. I'd be really grateful.
Sorry, my name is Ram Lakha, from St. Zaman City Councillor and former Lord Mayor. Just on the issue, very interesting, first of all, to understand everything, because we in Coventry, we know what you're talking about, certainly, but there are issues which are challenges for us. And Martin and John has put that very nicely in that order. The question is just one, because we keep saying we are celebrating diversity. And I've been keep saying since I became Lord Mayor at that time, I changed, slightly tweaked it. I'm thinking we should be saying we celebrate unity in diversity. That should be the case to bring us together rather than just celebrating diversity. I think that if somebody can just give us some understanding on it.
The High Representative would like to respond to that.
Thank you very much. I just want we are convening our global event every year and a half, every other year and a half, and move in different regional. Last time was in Vienna. This time will be in Bali in Indonesia. And the title of our global event, which will take place on August 29 and 30th, Unity and Diversity. So it's there, and I'm sure, and this one in Bali, there will be many great issues related to, but the title is Unity and Diversity. So we took that into account, and I'm sure even the discussions here, without unity and diversity, it will be very difficult. And if I will just, Michael, before he finished his remarks, he touched upon the MDGs, which is an important issue for the international community now. Why? Because next year it will be the end, and we have to work and move forward with a new plan, especially the MDGs goals, unfortunately, hasn't been achieved as the leaders promised in year 2000, which is the most important to reduce the poverty around the world in order to focus on sustainable development. And diversity and cultural of peace, it's part of the MDGs. Because it concerns stability, security, and prosperity. So I thought I will just tell you that in August you're most welcome to join us in Bali. It's a nice place, but we will be working. So this has been already on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Can we take another question, please? The gentleman at the back there.
Hello, Stuart Jennings, chaplain here at Coventry University and also at White University. A fascinating talk, fascinating response, but just to say that on the economic radar, the three key players in the next 2 decades will probably be India, China, and possibly Japan, where the issue of diversity and the issue of migration have a very different history and a very different future to that which we see in the West and the Middle East. I just wondered how the team would respond to that.
Martin, would you like to start with that one? Oh, sorry.
These are fundamental questions, which is why I deliberately, for those that know me, kept my comments to the city, because I'm barely bright enough to be able to try and at least articulate some of the ways in which we might meet some of the challenges about ingenuity of our own base, let alone thinking about the very different backgrounds. What I would say is the South America, the growth of Brazil as well within that, and I think this is kind of on a macro scale the comments I was trying to make, that the future sectors of growth in Coventry, or indeed the sectors of growth for creating wealth creation, which hopefully is enjoyed by more across the globe, will have differential impacts with regards to the labour force, the markets, the way in which people are able to mobilise themselves to take those opportunities. And these are certainly not answers that I have. But I guess the point I was trying to make in Coventry, in our way, we're trying to move the debate away from a very simplistic view about the provision of labour, for example, to meet growing sectors, and to really think about the types of job, the types of people that we want to be able to fill those jobs, the kind of skill base we've got latently, the kind of skill base we want from others. And I think that is absolutely the characteristic of change that we should be seeing in some of these fast-growing countries elsewhere as well. But yeah, these are fundamental questions I certainly don't have ready-made answers to.
Yes, and I wouldn't pretend to have better answers, but I lived for nearly 5 years in Indonesia, and the unity and diversity that they celebrate as their national slogan, they don't actually always deliver, and I'm sure if we had Indonesians here today, they'd agree. And the point you raised, I think, is fundamental to some of the principles that we have to discuss. I think that in Europe, we have a lot more experience of living with difference, a lot more interfaces between different faiths, ethnicities, much more movement and migration than is the case in the countries you referred to. There is much less mobility internally in India than between India and other places. There is almost no mobility within the mainland of China, and Japan is well known for being relatively closed and self-contained. I think the experience we've had must begin to inform a future that looks forward when those immobilities become much more mobile, as I'm certain they will. And I think there's a long durée for the research that our centre will be doing in looking at trust-based relationships between people, which will be hugely exportable to these places when they come on stream in a European-style diversity, which they haven't experienced yet. Good question.
Thank you. Any further questions? Oh, there's a gentleman.
Good evening. My name is David Greenwood. I'm taking a deep breath. I'm here from the British Army. It struck me there are two threads that run through each of the four speakers that we've heard this evening. One is the need for trust and how to build it and how to safeguard it. And the second is the need for leadership. And I wondered how the panel members would go about setting a paradigm where trust is earned and retained, and where it's lost, it's regained. And how, secondly, we identify and equip leaders to meet the challenges that you've all set out for us on the forward agenda from here. Thank you.
Could we start with the Dean on that? Because the Church, as we all know, has had challenges in the past with leadership. It would be really interesting to hear.
Okay, I was going to start with trust. Thank you very much. And actually, what I'd like to do is just to bring in a response to the question from Ram before about how trust is built, and in a sense, just to re-echo what I said perhaps in before, which is the challenge to move beyond simply tolerance. It was quite interesting in the recent debate about whether we're a Christian country that one of the things that was said repeatedly was one of the Christian values is tolerance. Actually, we're not called to tolerance; we're called to love. Yeah. The so-called golden rule, which is common across, I think, all faith traditions, so it's not just Christianity, to love your neighbour, is not a commandment to tolerate your neighbour, which is quite a different thing. That's the most we can start with, and I guess it's a starting point, certainly not a finishing point. And so the challenge to really build relationship has to be the primary building block for building trust. And actually, building relationship tends to start with leadership. We're often kind of challenged, does building relationships start, as it were, top down or bottom up? But very often,
build a relationship does actually start top down, although that sounds a bit politically incorrect these days, because it's forging relationship and the vision for new relationship at a senior level, which often creates a climate in which other relationships begin to build. So that's just a starting point for me there.
Your Excellency, would you like to contribute on that question? So it'd be really interesting to hear your global perspective on that. I mean, I was interested actually in what might be said, if I might just bring my own thoughts into it, about your European model of diversity. Would there not be a danger of that being seen in asserting that leadership as a form of latter-day colonialism?
That's a very important question. Well, I just want to talk a little bit about why this idea of alliance of civilization. Yes, of course, the idea or the initiative came after the attack on New York, but also to avoid clash of civilizations through religion or through culture or through the idea that the UN need a soft tool power to prevent conflicts, to diffuse tensions around the world, because there is so many problems today around the world, and that's really affect, if we want, affect our development. How can we talk about poverty if we are engaged with the crisis? And also to maintain peace, security for the international community. So by trying to promote culture of peace, to promote dialogue among different faiths, to promote the diversity and to focus more on youth and education and migration and media, responsible media. Thank you.
So it's a great opportunity to come back at you on imperialism. How long have you got? I think the point I was trying to make about our experience in Europe wasn't about exporting a model. This would be ridiculously silly thing to do, not only because it would be imperialist, because it wouldn't work. But I think there are experiences in a very diverse and highly mobile Europe that we can study as academics and learn from. And there are three that come to mind, just to give an example. The first is that we know a lot about the importance of two-way responsibility for integration after mobility. When I visited Shanghai not so long ago, there was no understanding at all that an inbound migrant would have any reception other than the requirement to change entirely to wherever he was going. There was a one-way sort, not even a thing. We know in Europe that is unlikely to be successful, that a host community needs to change as much as the new migrant, the adaptation. Secondly, a point that Martin made earlier, we know in Europe also that in times of austerity, when economic stability doesn't exist, it's almost impossible to deal with the issue of cultural diversity. So that's something we know from our research, from evidence, that you need a platform of stability before you can cope with some of these difficult things. That's exportable, that's not imperialistic. And finally, we know that structural inequality matters hugely, and that where you have structural inequality and a complete absence of equal opportunity and social mobility, you will not succeed in dealing with some of these big issues. So those are big lessons we can draw from our research and humbly offer them up in a certainly non-imperialist way.
Look, just make, because I don't want to lose the specific question from our army colleague, for what it's worth, a very quick reflection on trust, certainly in our world here with regards to the public service view of trust and how we can create those bonds. The reality of this, from my perspective, is that the deep enduring trust that's built, for example, between ourselves and citizens, and between citizens of all different diverse backgrounds, is really hard. It's hundreds of thousands of contact transactions to keep building that trust to make it as enduring as possible. But what we also know is those bonds of trust, as hard as they are to get them enduring, can be lost very easily by a poor transaction or a poor reaction. Therefore, it's very, very tough, would be my take, and I think that's exactly the same from the experience of colleagues that work in this field a lot more than I do. I just want to make a comment, because I've got the platform around leadership in this area, because, and I might upset you in what I'm going to say, but I think it's a challenge back out. My take is we should never, with His Excellency is a great example, ever underestimate the power of leaders who not only are powerful in themselves, with the greatest respect, but come from an incredibly powerful organisation to be able to shift change happening in our places on a global level. Never underestimate that. But equally, if anyone in this room believes that the future is about that kind of hierarchical, power-based leadership, I think that's a false thesis. I think the future is about leaders not going cold on their responsibility because they're in a powerful position, but the future is about distributed leadership, about a notion of leaders letting go and understanding that, and is my point probably not very well articulated, in Coventry and elsewhere, if we're really going to deliver a sustainable city for the future, it's about those usual models of power and leadership are going to be diffuse across a greater set of our people, and leaders are going to emerge from the most unexpected of places. And I'm afraid that is countercultural to many of our institutions. It's certainly countercultural to the army. I know you'll come back in terms of why there's a model of leadership there, but these are the debates we need to have, and unless we're having them in great academic institutes with people like yourselves, I worry that debate will never be had.
Thank you. Well, we've got time for a couple more. Yes.
Gavilanes, MBA student from Coventry University, and I link to the points that His Excellency said, that it's wrong to try to impose standards on countries that are developing or emerging countries when it's about economic development. But what about also education? Professor Hardy said also that to end poverty we also need education, but it should be done with the standards of those countries where they need it, like the developing countries or third nation countries. Like they need different things that people in more developed countries. They need other standards on education. They need to learn how to work in the agriculture, for example, or they need to learn how to cope with their environment. Is there anything that we as students or that any of your institutions can suggest to do? How can we do that when we're going back to our countries?
Thank you. You see, education is one of our main pillars. We cannot, fight hatred. We cannot fight poverty without good education. This is the responsibility, of course, is of the international community. I just want to refer to some great initiatives around the world, but we need collective effort to address this issue, because in my home country, Qatar, our former First Lady, she is in charge and responsible for the education in Qatar. And in the last 15 years, she did an amazing job by lifting the quality of the education. But also, she is an international fighter for youth and for education, especially against poverty. So she came with an initiative after she checked that there is 61 million child without education around the world. And she said, we are responsible for that. She said, I am going to create a foundation in Qatar, but I will be ready to work with all organizations around the world to educate the 61 million child before the end of the MDGs, which is next year, and then start looking for post 2015 and beyond. She took responsibility for 10 million children. Between last year, November, till today, she reached out to 6 million. But also there is 51 million children in the world need other organizations, other governments, member states to come along, and she called this initiative Educating a Child. So there is many great initiatives, and we try to work with them and try to bring them together in order to encourage others to come along and support this initiative. If we try to educate those children, then we will see less problem, less tension, less conflict, fighting poverty, and maybe we focus on prosperity and great development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And a round of applause. I think that's all we've got time for. Can we please once more applaud the audience as well?